community and for SEAD Gallery for their contribution, and the audience, of course. I'm thrilled about all of this. My wife, of course, is here. Many of you know her, and 4 of my 6 children are here. My youngest one's not. He's in Austin celebrating his 30th birthday. And my number 4 child, Amy, his husband's having some surgery tomorrow, so she can't make it. But Katie is back here. She's a kindergarten teacher. And Leslie, my oldest one, is a real estate agent and married to Craig, who owns a construction company. He's an Aggie. And Natalie, who's an accounting professor. And an exciting aspect of her situation is her daughter is also an accounting professor in the Mays College. And that has to be a huge, huge honor for Natalie to have her daughter teaching in the same department that she is. And it's certainly an honor for me to have them over there. And I come from a very huge family of professors. My first wife, Barbara, was a history professor and vice president of Blinn. She died, unfortunately, a year and a half ago. Of course, Natalie and her daughter. And I have to say a word about her daughter. Everybody knows somebody that is not anything like anybody else in the family. And her daughter, Kayla, to my knowledge, never made a B through bachelor's in accounting. Of course, all 12 years at public school. Bachelor's in accounting, a master's in accounting, 9 hours toward a PhD in accounting. She decided she didn't want to be an accounting student any longer, so she switched her major and got a PhD in public health. And the College of Mays College hired her back to teach accounting because of her extensive background. But how many people can say they have a kiddo that went through 12 years of public school and 4 degrees and never made a B? We thought she was diligent, but I think she missed 2 questions on the SAT, or she would have had a perfect score. So she's more than just diligent. I would like to thank my editor, Bill Earl. The company that I worked with is a self-publishing operation. I tried to get this with some agents, and I tried to get it with some of the big publishing firms, and I got rejected, and I knew I would. And I had it confirmed. I went to a workshop in Austin, a writer's workshop, and there was a woman there who has a law degree and also is a book agent, or an author agent. And she made a comment, not to me directly, but to the group, that if you want a book published by a major publishing house, you better be an athlete, a rock star, a politician, and even then, you better have a bunch of dirt in your life. And so I don't know that I have enough to qualify. Anyway, I worked with Bill Earl, and I can't say how wonderful he was to work with. And if you've published books, it helps to have an editor. I'd like to thank all of my teachers, professors, coaches, and heroes, my life heroes, or her grandmother, and these kids' grandfather. And I write extensively about what they meant to me. I have legions of students that I owe a great debt to, and they've been wonderful to me. I'd like to thank Jill Pankey for the 2 covers. Jill's a retired artist from the art faculty at Texas State, and her husband Bob got a PhD in physical education, played football at Missouri, and is a retired professor at Texas State, and he and Jill now are freelance artists. And so I'd like to thank Jill for letting me have these free. I'd like very much to thank Cal Boykin. Does anybody know Cal? Cal Boykin was a longtime professor at A&M, and he was the first teacher that I had in the community ed writing program. And unfortunately, he died after about a year or maybe 2 years, and he was replaced by a guy that I consider a mentor, Bill Harper. And among Bill's many accomplishments are 6 books, and one that he wrote was called 11 Days to Hell, 11 Days in Hell, and it's a book about, some of you may be old enough to remember when the guys took over and captured a number of the teachers and personnel at the prison in Huntsville. And they had a 3 or 4 or 5, 6 days, 11 days actually, holdout. And one teacher, I think, was killed, maybe 2. And Bob Wyatt, who was the very famous FBI agent who later became the director of security at A&M after he retired from the FBI, was involved in the shootout that killed some of the people in that siege. Bob Wyatt was also involved in a shootout with a guy years ago, and they made a movie about that shootout called The Sugarland Express. And so I have a great admiration for Bill Harper and a huge debt of gratitude to him. I would like to thank Glenn Dromgoole, who wrote a very wonderful review of the books in last Sunday's Eagle, and he's A&M class of '66. And I never had Glenn in class, but I had his brother in 3 classes, and I had his cousin in 2 classes back in the '60s and '70s. And I'd like to thank, last of all, 2 great friends, one of whom is deceased, Jack Nation, par excellence college professor and 35-year jogging partner and workout partner and collaborator on several articles in a book that I wrote. And also my old friend Tony Bourgeois, who is very prominently featured in here because he and I have been at A&M for 53 years. And we've been all over Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and all over the United States together. And he's been a very esteemed and valued friend for many, many years. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I came to this point, and I'll keep it brief. But I had wonderful parents, and my parents were bright. My mother was uneducated. She grew up in an era in which women were expected to be stupid and unmotivated and subservient to their husbands. And I think it killed her. She died at 47 of alcoholism. When she died, she was 5'3" and weighed 67 pounds. But she was a wonderful mother until she died. My dad was a Harvard guy and a bright guy and a very talented labor union organizer and a hardcore yellow dog Democrat, and I inherited some of that from him, I'm sure. But he was absolutely, if you drew up in my, not everybody agrees with me that knows the man, but if you drew up a diagram of the perfect father when you were growing up, he would be it. He was absolutely phenomenal, and he gave me kind of an ultimatum when I turned 18. He said, I don't want you to go to college, but I'd only pay for it if you go to A&M. So that made my choice easy. Michael, thanks for coming too. I didn't mention you. Michael Kraft is an old friend from reasonably recent acquaintances. I lived with my grandfather most of my life because my mother and dad were divorced when I was 7, and I lived in Texas City 3 months a year and Oklahoma 9 months a year while I was growing up, and that was a wonderful experience. But my grandfather took my mother in and my 2 siblings, and I lived in my grandfather was a chemist and a mayor and a prosperous guy, and we had maids and we had cooks, and for 3 or 4 years in my early childhood, we had a black woman who was a phenomenal soul food cook, so I ate soul food for 4 or 5 years, and then she was replaced by a German woman, and so I ate German food for 3 or 4 years, so I grew up on pretty good cuisine. Both my grandfather's wives died about 20 years before the 2 grandfathers died, and both of them died 18 years before I was born, so I didn't know my grandmothers. But one of my grandmothers, my maternal grandmother, was Gertrude. And Gertrude developed abdominal cancer, and she was convinced that God was going to heal her, so she refused to go to doctors and see what they could do. And she labored with this problem for many years. I was told that the tumor was so big that when she walked, she had to put it in a wheelbarrow and wheel it around. But shortly before she died, they did some surgery and they removed a tumor. And when the tumor was removed, she weighed 86 pounds and the tumor weighed 86 pounds. So, she believed, she fell in with this faith healer who's one of the most famous faith healers in the United States, Amy Simple McPherson, and she followed her all over the nation in hopes that Amy would cure her of her abdominal cancer. I didn't bring a book. I left it in the car. There was growing up, I loved to read, and I'm not terribly good at math and some other things, but I can read and spell. And when I was in the 4th grade, I developed a big ego because I took an achievement test in the 4th grade, and I scored at the freshman college level in reading. So that allowed me to read all kinds of things as a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old. And my grandfather bought me a subscription to Sport Magazine and Sporting News, and so I read that for many years with his subscription. And I had a book that I found on his shelf called 50 Famous Stories Retold, and I'm sure, I don't remember now, but I probably read that book 100 times. And it's 50 famous stories of Diogenes wandering around looking for an honest man, Joan of Arc, Philip Nolan, famous biblical characters, very famous people who Damon, the sword of Damocles was in there, Damon and Pythias was in there, and those stories were really formative in the way that I looked at life. And I just look back, I lost my copy from my childhood and found an old one in a used bookstore. So anyway, that reading and being exposed was a huge formative factor in my. All I ever wanted to do I used to take notebook paper and divide it into newspaper columns, and in very small print I would write newspaper articles and stories. And out of that grew a fascination with the idea of writing, and all I ever wanted to be from about the 7th grade on was a novelist, and I still haven't written a novel. I played all the sports in high school, and I was good at all of them, and had some chances to play football and track in college, but again, my dad's offer trumped the offers that I got for small college football, and I didn't want to play football because I had an aversion to getting hit, and that's not a good sport if you don't like to get hit. And I did walk on in track at A&M and ran the 100 and the 200 at A&M, but as a walk-on. After I graduated, I wanted to be a coach, so I majored in coaching. I decided halfway through that I didn't want to be a coach, so I went to North Texas to become a school administrator. I decided halfway through that I didn't want to be a principal or a superintendent. I had 3 years in the Army. I spent 3 years at Fort Hood, Fort Stewart, desert maneuvers in California. And think about this. You've heard all of this stuff about the Middle East. In 1963, our commanding general called us all together and said, "Men, we're going to the Mojave Desert, and we're going to engage in desert warfare because it has been decided by the Pentagon that one of these days we're going to have to invade the Arab countries and steal their oil." Now, that's not what you were told. I found that fascinating. We went out to California and we did an exercise called Desert Strike. 28 years later, George H.W. Bush got us into Desert Storm. There were more people killed in Desert Strike in 1963 in a peacetime exercise than were killed in Desert Storm, which was an actual war. We had people killed right and left in that exercise, people passing out and being run over by tanks, suicides, car wrecks, jet wrecks, and it was really quite an interesting so-called peacetime activity. My organization at Fort Hood was also sent to Fort Stewart, Georgia, to invade Cuba in 1963, and fortunately Mr. Khrushchev and Mr. Kennedy got together and resolved that peacefully, and we didn't get to go to Cuba and invade Cuba. But I enjoyed my 3 years in the Army, and I'm thrilled that I do it, and I'm very proud of my service. And I try to stay away from politics, but I really don't like football players who take away from the military with their superficial kneeling. find that to be very dishonorable to people who have fought in combat or fought in near combat. I did a doctoral program at North Texas. About 9/10 of the way through that, my favorite professor came up and said, they have a 4-month job at Texas A&M, would you like to have it? And I said, yes, I'll take it. And at the end of 4 months, they said, won't you hang around for the summer? I said, fine, I'll hang around for the summer. I moved my wife and my oldest 2 kids down to College Station. And at the start of the fall, they said, why don't you just stick around this year? So I stuck around that year. And then at the end of that year, they said, why don't you apply for a job at Sam Houston? They've got a wonderful job there. So I applied to go to Sam Houston. I went over and interviewed at Sam Houston. And this is 1967 or 8, so keep in mind a little history. And I thought the interview went well, and I figured my days were numbered at A&M, so I would be thrilled to go to Sam Houston. I like the smallness and other aspects of the university. And as I was leaving the room, Jack Staggs, the Dean of Education at Sam Houston at that time, said, oh, by the way, I need to ask you one more question. You're not one of those troublemakers and rabble-rousers that believes in rights for minorities, are you? Yeah, that was my response. Jack and I didn't agree on a contract. That carries me through book 1, kind of, in a very surface cover. Book 2, I'll keep it brief, although it's hard because there's so much in it. And I'm going to read you just a couple of excerpts so you can get some feel for the writing style. And it's a section called, Who Am I? And you know, we all perceive ourselves in interesting ways, and they didn't always in agreement with how others perceive us. But this is what I think of me. I have been a fair to middling professor, a public speaker of some facility, a passable researcher and writer, a steady and amiable colleague, a willing mentor to students, a patient listener to students if not family, a facilitative professor, sponsor of annual study abroad experiences for young Aggies, a decent husband, a loving father, and a good friend to many. I'm a tad overweight, have consumed entirely too much beer, thus freeing up water to wash dirty cars, dirty clothes, dirty people, laugh loudly and frequently, curse like the proverbial sailor when provoked, my lovely wife says I am partial to tall, blonde, athletic Amazons, but then again, short, dark-haired, non-athletic Ecuadorians or Italians will do too. To paraphrase the actress, writer, sex symbol, and master of the double entendre, Mae West, the old silent movie star, whose words could also apply equally to women. She said, I like two kinds of men, domestic and imported. I mean, domestic and foreign. This goes on for quite a while, but it gives you some index of what I think. I talk a bit about being a professor, obviously, because that's what I've done for 54 years. And I have a little section in which I give you a little feel for what students think of my teaching. And by and large, they think positively more than negatively, but occasionally I do get a negative comment. And I value those as much as I do the positive ones. But one of my favorites is, and it's very terse and very succinct, the only thing I hate more than sports psychology is Dr. Leuni's. So, I also got one that went on forever and ever and ever about how I was never prepared for class, did not pass out a proper syllabus, was disrespectful to students, never on time. It went on and on and on forever. And the girl said, I'm going to have to take abnormal psychology again because of taking it from Dr. Leuni's. We threw her rating in with the other 24 students in the honor section I got the highest rating. With hers in there, I got the highest ratings I've gotten in 25 years in that course. So obviously there were some people who didn't agree with my students. The most favorable possible comment, one of my many favorites, but this kid wrote, said, if the guy who does the Dos Equis commercials ever dies or gets fired, I nominate you to be the most interesting man. I talk about my colleagues, and some people are in here old enough to remember Al Casey. Al Casey was really a mentor. Al and I didn't agree on much of anything, but he taught me something that I had never been exposed to. And you know, there are people in higher education who think we ought to have teachers and we ought to have researchers on the assumption that if you do research, you're not a good teacher. Al Casey was a great teacher and a great researcher, and he taught me that those two things can go hand in hand. And it has been my experience after 53 years that the best teachers are almost always the best researchers. And so I love that model, and I don't think the other model is really worthwhile. I talk about some of the most, you know, A&M was an interesting place. When I came here as a student in '56 and as a faculty member in '66, there were 38,000 people in Brazos County. College Station had 7,000, Bryan had 18,000. And there were no chain restaurants, no chain hotels, really a backwater place. And I always called Texas A&M when I was a student in my first 5 or 10 years as a faculty member as a mediocre cow college. And of course that gets me in deep trouble with my students because they love the place and don't think it has any warts. And it does have a few. And the reason I said that is because when I came here, there were no psychology courses, there were no philosophy courses, there were no music courses, there were no art courses. That's not a university. Yeah, they had some excellence in science and engineering and the vet school, but that's not a university. That problem has been remedied. It is not a mediocre cow college. It is a fantastic university, and I have been blessed to be able to watch that for 53 years. That transformation is wonderful. I do feel vindicated a little bit when Ray Bowen retired as president of A&M. Ray Bowen went to school 2 years before I did and went off and got his PhD and came back to A&M as president. And when on his retirement speech, he said, when I was a student at A&M, and when it was a very mediocre cow college. So there's two people thought it was mediocre cow college, the president and me. I talk at great length about my fascinating department heads, and I've tried to protect their identities where I can. But my first experience at A&M was a case study in abnormal psychology. My first department head was having an affair with a graduate student, and he was very guilt-ridden about it. In his last 3 years of life, he couldn't talk. And so we decided that he was hysterically mute. Well, that was a good introduction for a guy who teaches abnormal psychology to have a department head who's a hysterical mute. The next guy came along, was disrespected by the faculty, and he started faking broken arms. He would come to school with his arm in a sling, and he finally decided to kill himself. And he drove out to Somerville, jumped in the lake, and couldn't drown. So he went over to Cook's Point between here and Caldwell and shot himself in the head and was successful in committing suicide. The third one was a full professor at Michigan State at age 29, which is quite an achievement, but he was a hopeless alcoholic, and we would go fish him out of ponds and fish him out of shrubs and get a call at 8 o'clock in the morning, come get this guy, he's passed out in the parking lot at the Holiday Inn. And finally he got cashiered at A&M because he and his wife drew guns on each other, and it made the newspapers. My fourth one was simply the sorriest, painful person I've ever met that's not in Huntsville. And he was cashiered at A&M for illegalities. He was cashiered at the university after he left here for illegalities or unethical behavior, at least. Come in, Rick. You can't sneak in. I've already blown your cover. And he decided he put his name in to be department head, and the story's too long to tell, but I voted strongly against him getting it. Some people on the committee told him that I did that, and for 8 years I didn't get a pay raise. And I figure he cost me probably $250,000 on my retirement and $250,000 on salary simply because of his vindictive behavior. I was telling an off-duty, I was drinking beer over here at Eastgate with an off-duty Dallas cop. I can't say the word, I can't say those words, can I? What do we say when we get ready to cuss, but we don't cuss?
Oh, I can't remember what that's called.
Well, she has some words in it.
Oh, are you looking at Ashland?
What?
Fuzzy kitten.
I'm getting ready to say some fuzzy kitten stuff.
I'm sorry, I studied that stuff.
You know, Steve, that wasn't the psychologist. That was the 7-year-old.
So anyway, I'm going to clean it up. He said, "You want him killed?" And I said, "I don't think we want to go that far." And he said, "I can get him killed for you if you want him killed." He said, "All I have to do is drive my cruiser into South Oak Cliff in Dallas and just get out of my car and say, 'Hey, I've got a guy in College Station that we need wiped out.'" He said, "It'll cost you $50 to get this guy killed." But he said, "They'll line up 10 deep at my cruiser for $50 to kill him." Now he said, "If you want him maimed, it's going to cost you $100 because guys that get maimed can also live to identify. So a maim is always going to cost you more than a murder." Well, I said, "Let's don't go that far." 20 years later, I'm walking down the hall, and Paul Wellman walks up to me, and some of you guys know Paul, our former department head, and his current colleague. He said, "You still in contact with that off-duty Dallas cop?" He said, "I've got some people I want killed." I said, "No, I'm not in contact anymore." After those 4, I've just inherited 6 or 8 or 10 kind of normal people who went about their job and didn't have any demonstrable psychopathology. And a couple of years ago, we got our first female department head, Heather Lynch, and so that's a nice thing for our department. Anyway, those are some of the things I write about. I talk at great length about General Rudder, one of the major historical figures in Texas A&M history. And he did many wonderful things for A&M, but he had a tremendous disdain for the faculty. And I talk at length about that. And I talk at great length about women at A&M because that's a really interesting chapter and still a challenge at A&M somewhat. But nothing like it was when she was in school or people 10 years older than her. They first allowed women in '63, and they endured a great deal of indignities. My first wife was pregnant with Amy, our number 4 child, and she was working on her PhD in history at that time, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And she walked across campus, and these 2 Corps guys are standing there, and one of them turned there and said, "They're letting pregnant ones in this place. This place is going to hell in a handbasket." Well, that's the kind of stuff that women had to endure. Am I out of time?
Well, it's 7.
Okay, I'll quit. So short.
Well, I mean, if they want to ask questions.
Okay, let me finish.
Yep. I'm just following directions.
There's so much more I want to say, but it gives you a little bit of a flavor of things. There's psychology in both books. There's sociology in both books. There's a great deal, a little bit of anthropology. There's a good deal of, some poetry. There's a song, the lyrics to a song that I wrote about my high school football coach called The Ballad of Tractor Trent. My high school coach was Tractor Trent, and he was got that name because he ran over everybody when he was playing football at Oklahoma State. And I wrote that ballad about 40 years ago, and I got a standing ovation at a local music venue for that song. And it's quite a high to get a standing ovation for a song you wrote. And that's my new passion, is music and writing music and the guitar. I'm taking lessons, and I'm going to try to develop a little facility that beyond what I already have. And there's just a lot of positive things about friends, and you know, it's not just about my friends, because you can look at my friends, and probably most everybody in here. I have a friend named Mike Ray who's a newsman in New York, and he's also a college professor, and he lost a job at William Patterson University because he had a wet seminar. And what that was he would bring a keg of beer to class the last day of class, and the students would all sit down and kill a keg of beer. And he had some underage drinkers, and so but he's just a fascinating character. Well, everybody has a Mike Ray of some kind in their life. I have a good friend in Houston, 6'5" guy. He was the director of the Big Brothers, Big Sisters program for Houston. one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in your life. There's a lot of nice guys that we all share. My best friend was just a prince of a guy, and everybody can identify with these people. So I don't feel like the titles are about A&M, but I feel like the books transcend those kind of things and go way beyond just local interest. I do have a section in the back that is devoted to Aggies only, and I start off with I alphabetized. I took 1,000 students over 50 years. That's 20 years. Is that my math good? 50 times 20 is 1,000.
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Natalie.
These are the 1,000 people who have made a huge impact on my life. And I've divided up by males and females, A to Z, and there's about 50% males, 50% females. And these are people who I feel have just made major impact on my life. 99.9% of them positive, 1 or 2 are in there because they were negative. But it's a tribute to the wonderful, wonderful students and the wonderful way I've been treated by students for 50 years. I also have kind of a funky section, my all-time A&M football team, made up of the guys that I've had in class who played football at A&M. And I have it broken down by position, and I have it by who I would start if I had 4 linebackers. This would be my first linebacker. I also, you umpires in here, there's some umpires and some softball guys. I have a huge section on slow pitch softball, and I have my all-time favorite umpire team. And these two are right in there. So it's a collection of all kinds of things. I have a little section at the end called Lagniappe, and Lagniappe is just a word for extra. If you buy, sometimes you get 13 oysters for 12, that's a Lagniappe. Or they throw in a little extra parsley when you buy parsley, that's Lagniappe. So it's a whole collection of just random, crazy things that I've encountered, thought about, dealt with, and so on. I wish I could talk forever because it's really, I've just barely touched the surface. Questions? Yes, sir.
How about the arrival of beer in College Station?
How about the arrival of beer?
The arrival, the great opening when when the chicken opened and Dudley's opened as competition, and they divide up Liberals and Cowboys.
I'm probably talking out of school right now, but she and I closed the Chicken or Dudley's down
With them.
probably 40 times a year till we got older. And so we have a long history with the Dudleys and Chicken. But it is interesting because I have a little section in there. When I went to school here and when I came back on the faculty, there were only 3 places in town you could buy beer. You could not buy wine or hard liquor. You had to drive out to Whiskey Bridge. Kate, I'm sure you remember that. And there was a little shack right out on the west side of the Brazos River where you could buy hard liquor and things, and it was called Whiskey Bridge. It, of course, has since gone by the wayside. So yes, there's been a huge change, and also, of course, in the nightlife, the music life, and everything else. But I have a little section on there. And I have a pretty good little section on Richard Benning, who started Dudley's, because I have a huge warm spot in my heart for Richard Benning. He's one of the nicest people that I ever met, and he died very prematurely.
He never fired anybody. Never fired anybody.
No.
Oh.
And there was never any violence in any of his places either. Somebody else have a question? Yes, sir.
The title of your book, I have this vague memory of seeing Jack out in the hall and saying, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm on my way to stamp out ignorance."
That's where it came from. Jack Nation and
I
Tony.
wondered, where did he get it from, you or the other?
I do not know. I honestly don't know, but Tony Bourgeois, and that's where the title came from. I'm glad you asked that, Steve. The title is, Jack and Tony and I periodically would say something to each other as we went down the hall. "What are you doing today? Where are you going?" "I'm getting ready to go stamp out some ignorance," because it's down room, plenty of it in room 108. And of course, the students are not ignorant. Many of them, as you know, are far brighter than we are. They're just much younger. And a little bit inexperienced, but that's our job to stamp out that inexperience. Maybe that'd be a better title, stamping out inexperience.
Too late.
These two young ladies are former students, mother and daughter, and I've had occasion to have quite a number of those, and that's always a kind of a high to have people convince their daughters that this experience is reasonably worthwhile.
You want to talk about the editing process? Oh, good.
What,
Yes,
did
I
you find
do.
anything in the writing process that was surprising to you?
Well, I wrote this over 15 or 20 years, and so it was very slow. I did it at part-time, weekends, whenever I had time. I think the hardest thing for me to grasp, two things. One of them is, how do you talk realistically about some topics without embarrassing other people who don't deserve to be embarrassed? I went to school with two sadists who, I am convinced, caused 15 or 20 young men to flunk out of this place by their sadism. I would absolutely love to mention them, but they have children and grandchildren, and it's probably not fair. But I'm convinced beyond any doubt their sadism accounted for many people dropping out of this place, and you know, just not embarrassing people. When I got ready to kind of go to the final stages, she proofread it twice. I proofread both books 9 times. And I had a student, Sydney Kobe, who did one, and she did a fascinating job. She's in law school at Wake Forest now. And you know, as I say, after she proofed it, she took all the sex and violence out, and she killed my sales.
It's still in there.
No, it's not.
There's enough.
But and just the difficulty, you know, I've written 6 or 7 textbooks, and one of them I've made $300,000 on, so it's been successful, and you know, financially, it's also been successful critically. But I just wrote the book, and the people did all the work after that, and they promoted it all over the country, and so on and so forth. All of this, because it's self-published, I have to do all the promotion, and it's really hard when you aren't a big name. I go to these writing things, and these big name authors have 15 and 20 and 30 people lined up to get their autographed book and so on, and I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs because I don't have the name recognition. I hope to get past that. But to me, that's the hardest thing that I've encountered, is just, you know, like she and I went over to the book festival that they have every September, October in Austin, and it lasts for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I got the 4:30 to 5 Sunday slot. There wasn't a person left in Austin by the time that I got my slot. And that's the kind of treatment you get. That's, you know, but it's taking off, and this is an example. The review that Glenn Dromgoole wrote helped. I just got something published today. If you want to look at another, a summary or a review of this process, the College of Liberal Arts just posted an article that was written about me just today. It was posted, and just go to College of Liberal Arts and you can find it. But those are some of the challenges. And I didn't write it necessarily to make money. I mean, I have an income, but I wouldn't object to making money. And you know, if you think about it, if there's 400,000 Aggies, if I could get 2.5% of those people to buy this book, I'd make $250,000. Just 2.5%. Another disappointment. Now, I don't know if that's what you asked why. I can't get these young Aggies to read it. I thought they would not beat the doors down to get to it, but I thought I would have some moderate sales among the students. And that's been a real source of disappointment, because I know they read. And I've tried to, you know, convince them that buy the book, because 50 years from now, you will love the book more you do now, because it's reminding you of your youth. And of course, none of them think they're going to be here 50 years from now, and that's too distant to even think about. And we all went through that when we were 21. You don't age; you just stay 21 forever, and you do age fast too. Yes.
So Bill, I can't remember exactly how you got into sports psychology or
Well, sports psychology is a relatively new field, and I got into it in 1981 or 82 because obviously I'm a psychologist by training, And I have a huge sport background. I played 7,500 softball games till I was 65. At the highest competitive level, I played golf, I played all of the high school sports, on and on and on. I was sports nut. So it was an opportunity to marry up my professional training in psychology with my fascination with sports. And I have never been I don't work with athletes, I simply write and talk about the subject. And I regret that in some ways, but I just never have gotten into that aspect of it. But it's kind of how I got into it, just a natural evolutionary process. For the first 15 years at A&M, I did clinical work with all kinds of schizophrenics and bipolars and all the other anxiety disorders and alcoholics and all those things. And I loved that. But I just, at about 15 years of that, I decided to kind of transition a little bit.
How's it different from the other?
Pardon me?
How's it different from the other
The other what?
psychological issues?
You mean sports psychology?
Yes.
You know, there's many things that sports psychologists do. Injury rehab. Athletes have a hard time when they're injured. They really don't handle that well. We do a lot of advocacy for women and minorities and so on. That's a big part of the job. But the thing that we're best known for is enhancing athletic performance. But what we hope is that those skills that come from psychology that make them better athletes will also be applied to their classroom, to their everyday life, and so on and so forth, because the principles that make you a good sports psychologist are daily good living principles. And one of the interesting things that's happened is I have friends, Dave Cook, Bob Rotella, Graham Jones in London, a couple other people have taken their sports psychology package to Deutsche Bank, Compaq, Coca-Cola, you name it, corporation after corporation after corporation, because the principles that apply to sports psychology also make you a good manager and a good business operator and so on. So they've taken this stuff into the business sector. There's a woman in Toronto by the name of Kate Hayes. She's taken this and she does nothing but working with dancers, actors, and singers, because most of those people have horrible anxiety problems about their performance, strangely enough. One study shows 28% of all actors and actresses virtually can't get on stage for their performance. And she capitalizes on that with these same principles. Yes, Raymond?
Arnold, going back to Earl Rudder days, and my brother and I were talking about this the other day, but we couldn't remember this guy's name. We know there was Earl Rudder, Pinky Downs, Lupo, and a guy named Bucky. Who was Bucky?
I don't know Bucky.
We could not come up with his last
Other
name.
ones I do know.
Yeah, we could not. I don't know. Maybe somebody here knows, but we couldn't come up with his
No, I
last name.
can't think who that is. General Rudder was fascinating, and he did many great things for A&M, and I went to his memorial on the beach in D-Day Beach, and he's a bigger hero in France than he is here, really. So he certainly was a genuine war hero, but spectacularly in many ways unqualified to be a college president. Bachelor's degree, not a very good student really, and in a major that had nothing to do with academics. And he was accomplished, and certainly I don't mean to denigrate, but he sent out messages that if a professor had a beard or a professor wore sandals, then he had made a horrible hiring decision. That if he had anything to do with it, there wouldn't be a beard on campus and there wouldn't be a pair of sandals on campus. And he probably would wipe out some pretty good intellects and some pretty good researchers and some pretty good people if you implemented that policy. And that certainly grated against what we stand for. And I particularly remember a meeting, the faculty was small enough that we could move them into chemistry building and hold the whole faculty in the chemistry lecture room. And General Rudder gave up to give a talk, and he told us, if you guys don't like it here, Highway 6 runs both ways. That's okay for students to do that to each other, but that's not appropriate for the president of a university to do. But what was fascinating was he had these three goons standing behind him, and they looked out at the professors in the crowd, and they were looking for dissent, I guess, and maybe somebody falling asleep. But the threat, and they wanted you to think they were packing heat too. And it was really a threatening environment for a college, university campus. And those are some of the things that I remember. But he did wonderful things for the university, pushing through some changes that had to be made. We had to upgrade the faculty. When I came here as a faculty member, 50% of the faculty had a PhD, 10% had a bachelor's degree, 40% had a master's degree, and virtually every one of those 40% got their degree at A&M. The good old boys club was huge. And he got that problem partially in the mill to resolve it. And we diminished the influence of the Corps, which needed to be done. Not everybody had to, when I was in school, if you dropped out of the Corps, you had to leave the university. We lost 42% of the freshman class in the class of 1961 by Thanksgiving. No university can survive losing 42% of its students by Thanksgiving. We now lose 8 or 9% the freshman year. And it was 40 and 50%. I started with 42 guys, and by the junior year, there were 9 of us left. Because if you didn't like the Corps, you had to leave the university. And the brain drain was also gigantic. All the top guys would stay in school for that first semester of their freshman year, make their grades, and then leave because they weren't going to stay here and put up with the stuff that they had to put up with in the Corps. That doesn't mean we didn't turn out great people. Ray Bowen, Tom Adair, Jack Lunsford, John Hagler, what's the guy's name that has the liberal arts center? Mel Glasscock. Those were guys I went to school with. They are first class, top people. And we turned out many like that. We also ran off at least an equal number of people like that. So it was an interesting time, fascinating time. And as I said, fascinating to see the university grow from a Cal College to a great university. I took the first philosophy course ever taken at A&M.
Who was your teacher?
Hmm?
Who was your teacher?
He was a retired minister.
Oh, no.
And he walked in and he said, this is philosophy 1. I had the chance to take my favorite professor. We didn't have any philosophers here, so the 2 people that taught her were a history professor and this retired minister. And my history professor was my favorite all-time undergraduate teacher, and I had a chance to take his section, but I thought, oh, let's try somebody new. So I tried the retired professor. He walked in the first day and he said, we don't have time for questions. I'm going to read the book, and I want you, if you want to follow me in the book, bring your book to class, and I will read the book to you, and you can follow along. And every once in a while, he would look up and he'd say, you see? And about halfway through, I did this little number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. 143 times. You see, 143 you see in one partial lecture. I just folded up my stuff and walked over to the golf course and played golf the rest of the semester because I had never made an F before, and I figured, here's a great chance. So I did. I didn't need it to graduate. So, but that was my introduction to philosophy.
How about Manuel Davenport? What a hero.
Wonderful,
Oh, yeah.
wonderful guy. John McDermott, Manny, really great people have come through all this. Yeah, I lost 2 colleagues in 5 days. John McDermott and Arnie Kramer died 5 days apart, I think. 2 of my great comrades and tremendous accomplished people. Anybody else? I think maybe I've gone long enough. Please eat some of these things.
Remind them about book
the
special.
Books. I didn't have to do, I had no say-so in this. The books are $30 a piece, and that was not set by me. I thought it was too much, but that's what was decided on. But I am, as a part of this, if somebody wants to buy a book, of course I'll be glad to autograph it. But I will sell you both books for $45 or one book for $25, if you want either one or the other book, which is a reduction of $5 on the individual book and $15 on the 2 books.